Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Friday, July 11th, 2025, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research 2 channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. Alright guys, well, I'd like to cover this article in Popular Mechanics that just came out yesterday. I got it in my feed and took a look at it because it's of interest to me because it's talking about some sort of lost branch of the human tree from 140,000 years ago. It's well within the time frame that they say that our present example of, present manifestation of humankind is, even though it doesn't make sense when you have, you know, the skeletal anatomy in a single species that's, ectomorph and mesomorph and endomorph, these small, medium, and large generalizations of skeletal anatomy. So why would that be? Just it wouldn't be because all species on the planet are generally within the same relative size, give or take a very little bit. No exaggerated individuals in animal species that are clearly observable in groups. So it's clear that, and then we have people like the Frisians around, who's still around, he's just inexplicable. I read the article on my channel about it where the travel blogger that looked into going there and visiting with these people looked into, what scientists claim that they don't know why they are the way they are, like totally different skeletal anatomy. Why would that be? And why would the bass people have 45% of their DNAs not similar to anybody else on Earth? How could that be? And there's much more to this. I mean, in tribute to William Corliss, okay, a guy who questioned a lot of different things, like the blood types, for instance. We know general blood types, but there's more than that. Did you know that? So we look into that one day too, because just more and more examples of how we are just a hybrid conglomeration that appeared out of nowhere 200,000 years ago for some reason, okay, and are very successful, because people who are smaller than us are, not quite as successful, right? But there was many kind of pygmy tribes. There was even a tribe in Africa that was generally the same morphism as our general anatomy, just smaller somehow. That's all. They weren't of any particular tribe. They didn't have dwarfism or they weren't small people. It wasn't like that. It's just like shrunken down versions of ourselves. Well, why would that be? So anyways, they're full of crap when it comes to that. They just some things that this is still echoes of Alice Hurdlish, who set back archaeology and anthropology some 40 years, according to people like C.W. Saram and Charles Mann, you know, and corroborated by a lot of people who worked around Herdliska and whatnot. So you have to look at everything with it's retarded by 40 years. Their appreciation of it, their evaluation of it, their perception of it is 40 years off because of Alice Erdlicher still to this day. That hasn't, the Smithsonian just recently apologized for his bad behavior and everything, but here's a guy who's a eugenicist who thinks, the native peoples of the Americas are all subhuman. Do you think his evaluations of anything about them are going to be, you know, positive in any way? I doubt it highly. Okay, and that was just well known about the guy. So in any case, they all have to work with the foundation of Alice Erlister, who claimed publicly there was no such thing as giants. Okay, but it doesn't match what was found by the Smithsonian in their own records. So it's whole thing is nonsense. But it's because he was this type of person who did not want to give religious people any sort of, fodder for what they believe about the Bible and all this kind of stuff. So, because he didn't like religion or the Bible, so he did these kind of things out of spite, not because of facts or anything like that, you know. So, in any case, let's read about this some lost branch of the human tree. Why would that be? We're all one species, but so they're learning more when they discover these things. All these new anthropologists and archaeologists are not following the old script. They have to question things. Because how can they present their findings to the world or have it peer reviewed or anything without making it all public? If something doesn't look right to them, then well, they have to admit it. Otherwise they look like fools if somebody else examines it and says, hey, wait a second here. So a 140,000-year-old skull may point to a lost branch of the human tree. The real mystery isn't how she died, it's how she doesn't quite fit the story. And it's just from yesterday, and I found it very interesting. Of course, this kind of stuff that comes to my feed, and other stuff too. I just want to understand there was another find of a much older skeletal remains that changed our perception. This was the headline on the tabloid science article from whatever publication it was. I don't remember what, but this just recently too, it changed our whole perception of human evolution and the human family tree and all this kind of stuff. So there's all these new findings and whatnot, it's changing all our perception of what it is. Okay, well, some of people were already in the know. People like C.W. Saran already knew that there were giant humanoids in the past because they kept on showing up everywhere. And his keen interest was archaeology, and he wrote the first book on it, available to the public. Okay, if anybody should know, and if anybody should know a bullshit story, it would be C.W. Saram. And every time he read about American archaeology during the reign of Alice Hurdlish, all he saw was bullshit stories. And now we know it's all true, see? According to the Smithsonian. All bullshit stories. All his archaeology and anthropology based on bullshit stories, see? That's what they have to go by now in their textbooks and everything. The ghost of Alice Hurdlish there leading the way. Here's what you'll learn when you read this story. Researchers determined that a skull of a female child from Skull Cave, I guess that means skull, in Israel shows both Homo sapiens and Neanderthal features, leading researchers to think she is possibly a hybrid, not probably. If she is a hybrid, that means that neither modern humans nor Neanderthals exclusively invented burial rituals. So they're saying that this is something that would be common to both species of hominid, right? But is it a no-brainer or what? I mean, we're supposed to have the same level of intelligence we've had for the past 200,000 years, right? So it's not like a no-brainer. You leave what Uncle Joe laying around a rot on the ground or whatever, or just maybe put a little dirt on top of it or something, just to like cover him up. So animals don't get at him, and you don't have to watch the poor guy, getting eaten away. And so it's what is that a tough one to figure out? So, anyways, again, tabloid science stuff just a wonderment to me. It is also possible that the skull belongs to yet undiscovered hominin lineage. So, what could that be? We're all one species or whatnot. So, are we a species or some sort of weird subspecies or something like that? And seems like some of us are. I don't know. I always joke about it because I see these fellows from a certain part of the world coming to my store, And they're like 4'10", 4'11", full grown men. Most like 12-year-olds are like bigger than them. You know, most of them, but they're full grown men. And all I can help thinking about is Cabeza de Vaca and him and his two companions there when they were shipwrecked on Florida there and came ashore. And first they met huge guys with 6-foot bows that they had to run from, right? Then they met some savage little people and whatnot that they had to run from too, all down there in Florida. So, and I mean, he was the guy who was, the hero there who went back to Spain and ran out all the conquistadors when he made his 8-year journey across the bottom of, what now we call the United States. But, you know, he's like a hero there, ratting them all out and whatnot. They gave him some sort of job or something to shut him up. See, that's what they do to people in history, like Felix Gold from Columbia University in 1935 Columbia Law Review. The child's bone was estimated to be between 3 and 5 years old when she died, and now referred to as the school child or school one, were anatomically identified as modern human. But that categorization is now in question. Okay, so it's 1929. Get that. Just make a note of that. Okay, because that's important, believe it or not. The date when this occurs, when certain people were the heads and the fathers and inventors of their field of anthropology. Hmm, who could that be now? Okay, so some of the girls' features resemble Homo sapiens, but others are an echo of Homo neanderthalensis, leaving scientists wondering whether she belonged to either of these species or was a previously unknown type of hominid. Okay, so this is something, some years back you wouldn't dare say, no evidence of it or whatever, but now with, more and more and more discoveries, and I know about Neanderthal for a long time now, but couldn't do the DNA research and whatnot until not all that long ago. But here they are saying, it could be an unknown type of hominid because the skull features are not making sense to them. Now, an international team of researchers has taken the most detailed look yet at the features of the child's skull in an effort to distinguish from whom she is descended. The skull's pastiche of Neanderthal and modern human features suggests she was possibly a hybrid, and that the earliest burial rituals were not exclusively invented by either species. Uh, no brainer there. Nothing to mention there. If it's like farming, like I've gone over on this channel. Children understand the concept of growing things from seeds just easily and naturally. Okay, you're telling me that people in the past couldn't figure that out on their own after the past 200,000 years where we supposedly had the same level of intelligence? Come on now. So, in the middle Pleistocene, the Levant was the crossroad of gene flows between indigenous lineages and other taxa from Africa and Eurasia, which is likely the explanation for Skull One anthropological, they said in a study recently published in L'Anthropologie. I guess it's that French publication there of, pretty famous one of anthropology. Some parts of the skull that were missing or misplaced only deepen the controversy because they can't get it to fit together right. During the original excavation, the mandible separated from the skull in the process. Researchers later reconstructed the mandible in plaster and found that it leaned heavily towards a Neanderthal lineage. It seemed to be plesiomorphic. Okay, so this is, not going by the 1929 evaluation of it that said it was just, normal Homo sapiens skull that they found back in time because, you know, at that time, people like Alice Hurdus, who was keenly interested in skulls above everything, okay, that, it's just, one of these subhuman, you know, people from the past. It's just, just some other subhumans, just like the ones we have now, because there's obviously, the people like us who have always been here and we're not like them, all these other subhuman people who have always been here as well, living alongside us. That's what Alice Hurley believed. Okay. To identify the fossils, the researchers used CT scans of the mandible and neurocranium, virtually reconstructing the enamel dentin junction of her teeth and right bony labyrinth of her skull to give a clearer idea of which hominin they might have belonged to. Bony cavities make up the bony labyrinth, which is found in the temporal bone of the skull in the middle and inner ear. The enamel dentin junction is where enamel and dentin meet in a tooth. The frontal squama or forehead needed to be repositioned virtually. What they found was still not easily distinguishable as either Homo sapiens or Neanderthal. Okay, how about this, geniuses? Okay, you found Neanderthals, you found Denisovans, you found a couple of other guys around. What's to say, not drinkers, but they know, based on what they're saying in this article, could be another species. Okay, something you could not say just a few years back. Okay, while the bony labyrinth appeared more like our own, scans of the neurocranium revealed that the cranial vault was low for a modern human, and that the occipital bone, which forms the back and base of the skull, was too elongated. Get that? Okay, too elongated. The shape of the mandible and lack of a chin made it more Neanderthal. The position of the teeth and the enamel dental junction were also closer to those of Neanderthals. Any modern features integrated so well with the more ancient features that it only strengthened the case for a hybrid. Okay? Even if it is a hybrid, we're learning more about how we're hybrids, not one species, okay, or an isolated, a unique original species, or some sort of compilation of different species from the past, and they can only work with the ones they've identified so far, but they never see in all your science lessons, whether they be in public school or college, they should always end the lesson with, "That's what we know so far." Okay, just like oh, I forget the name of that radio guy. You know, the story so far. That's I forget that guy's name, but in any case, you know, they should always end it with, "That's the story so far." you know, they're not 100% absolutely sure of it, but they can't say that because who's going to listen to that? So it's like, yeah, you go to college and learn all this scientific stuff, but hey, we could discover one thing and it's, you don't know nothing, but it should be like, the followers of, Confucius or whatever, the man who says he knows doesn't know, and the man who says he doesn't know knows. So that's good advice. The researchers also aren't sure why this was carried out. Burying the dead might have not only been for practical reasons such as keeping out decay and disease, but also as a claim to a territory. Well, you know, okay, it's a claim to a territory, your dead ones buried there or whatever it is, I guess, the assumption would be some sort of ancient law that had some bearing on that or something. Maybe, I guess, I don't know. It just always has to be beyond practical reasons, make it more interesting. So, in any case, that's the end of the article anyway. So, It's just, all right. So, they're coming to these conclusions now. And as I said, I saw in another article from Morocco, I believe it was, they dug up some much older skeletal remains and Neanderthal remains, and it supposedly changes the whole notion of human evolution and all kind of stuff. And you know these DNA studies that they're doing are, you know, coming to different conclusions about, what our past really is, and, where we descend from, et cetera, et cetera. So, but as I said again, people like C.W. Schramm knew everything that was going on already because he questioned it, just being an intelligent person. He said, he read the anthropology and archaeology and questioned the conclusions to some of these things. And he was particularly fascinated by the large scale remains found around because it didn't make any sense, you know, from a scientific point of view of us all being one species and, within relative same size, but we're not, see, because there's all these individuals who are whether they be 1 or 2% of the population, well, they count too, I guess. And then, you have people like the Frisians and the chiefs of the Fiji Islands and the Watusi people, at least in the 20th century. We don't know what happened to them. From what I understand, I read an article about them. They were like largely dispersed in the early 60s. So they got rid of them. You know what I mean? You can't have that reference to history and all kind of stuff, you're gonna find out exactly what it's all about. Maybe the people at the top, like Alice Shortlisted, knew, and that's why he denied the existence of the skeleton. So, you know, and that was always a thing about that came to light where the Smithsonian somehow is you know hiding these skeletal remains and whatnot because they don't have them available, but he's Hurley was a pioneer in the field of anthropology and the first curator of physical anthropology at the Smithsonian Museum from 1904 until 1941. Okay, so this took place in 1929 that they found this skeletal remains, which they said, it's just another, type of Homo sapien, which is what Alice Hurley could, and he's real interested in skulls. Okay, this is right in line with the pioneer in the field of anthropology. He's just not nobody, or just a guy who's, was a curator for a while. They like to minimize it, I think, because of all the controversy that surrounds him. Okay, Saram mentioned him in his book in 1971, and Charles C. Mann mentioned him in his book in the early 2000s. There, I guess, when he wrote his books there. Um, so, based on what he read about him and from actual um, testimony from people who worked around it at heard this was batshit nuts. Okay, he says right here he correctly theorized that migration from Asia to the Americas via the Bering Strait was the origin of the American Indians. Well, it couldn't be, as they found out, because based on the research now, so this is, Wikipedia hasn't been updated or upgraded yet, to current Smithsonian, where they all come by boat down to South America. It's the only way they could get down there 20,000 years ago, according to them. Has nothing to do with the Bering Strait at all. Okay? But incorrectly dated the migration as having occurred not more than 3,000 years ago. He initially denied evidence by archaeological findings such as that of Folsom Man in 1927, which pushed the date of human presence in the Americas back to more than 10,000 years ago. So he initially denied evidence by archaeological findings such as that of Folsom Man, okay, which is accepted now. He was wrong. This occurred not more than 3,000 years ago. Like going all the way back 20,000 years ago in South America now. So the guy was batshit nuts. Okay, and it's just as simple as that, as you can read about him anywhere. Okay, and what Hurley was up to. Okay, so this the Washington Post investigated Alice Shirley's skull collection at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. It was amassed largely without consent and used in racially biased research. Some of these remains are currently being repatriated to the communities they were taken from, according to the Boston Globe. The Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology at Harvard has also been involved in controversies regarding its collection practices and treatment of Native American remains and cultural objects. In 2021, the museum acknowledged its complicity in historical unethical practices and pledged to address these issues. As a result, the museum is actively working to repatriate human remains and funerary objects to the tribes they were taken from, in accordance with the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Okay, so these people made these errors and mistakes, and in their evaluations as well of anything that could have been done or made by Native American peoples. Okay, they're subhuman. Whatever they did in the past was just primitive, average stuff. You know, all the evidence of these canal systems and you know built stone built objects all over the country and other type constructions and everything suggest otherwise. But, you know, Alice Shortlister, who's putting back archaeology and anthropology in another 40 years, denied all this stuff, including the giants. Okay, just like this Indian mound, evaluated by the Peabody with their unethical practices, right? That, even Tim McSweeney on Facebook there is too stupid to understand that this is not a lime kiln. This is some native construction that they removed 100 truckloads of stone from in the front of that some farmer put there by himself. Okay, some old, farmer John. Yeah, Pepperidge Farm. Yeah, I'm gonna put a lot of stones on the corn lawn. Whatever. It's just ridiculous. Okay, it's obviously a Native American construction, but hey, according to the Peabody Museum, see about their unethical practices, because if the people are subhuman, then what ethics should we, apply to them at all? Okay, it's not a lime kiln. Here's lime kilns. Okay, dopey. This looks like a lime kiln right here. Okay, one from the same time period. Okay, does this look like a lime kiln? Okay, it's obviously evaluated wrong on purpose. Okay, as far as the Smithsonian and giant skeletal remains, so here's what the AI says about it. Well, hoaxes, the origin of the hoax about the Smithsonian admitting to destroying giant. Well, maybe it's a hoax that they admitted to it. Okay, so no legitimate evidence. Okay, all this stuff, which is bullshit based on their own evidence. Reports of giant skeletons in the United States, especially in the 19th and early 20th century, were often based on misidentifications of large animal bones, intentional hoaxes, or journalistic sensationalism. For example, 1934, an investigation by Alice Hrdlicka, a Smithsonian curator, debunked many claims of giant skeletons, attributing them to will to believe combined with errors from amateur anthropologists. No, not this beautiful guy. Not this batshit nuts guy. Okay? That the Washington Post had to apologize for. You know? Used in racially biased research. Okay? We're gonna believe anything that this piece of crap said about anything that has to do with native peoples anywhere? Or any of his acolytes in the world who are, his understudy, Brucey Brown Lips. We gonna believe that guy? Well, who the hell is working in, upper academics in anthropology and archaeology? Well, all people who are Brucey Brown Lips to Alice Hrdlicka, okay, who set anthropology back 40 years, okay? So no giant skeletal remains. Hmm, that's very interesting to me. How tall were Dina skeletons remains according to Bureau of Ethnology, which Herdliska ran? Based on the 12th annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology, Adena skeletal remains were found measuring between 7 and 8 feet in length. In one specific case, the report details a skeleton discovered by Bureau agents that measured 7 feet 3 inches from the base of the skull to the toes, suggesting that the individual was likely 7.5 feet tall when alive. In another instance, P.W. Norris, a Bureau of Ethnology agent, recorded a skeleton at the Great Smith Mound in Charleston, West Virginia, measuring 7 feet 6 inches in length and 19 inches between the shoulders. While these specific examples indicate some of the individuals were exceptionally tall, it's important to remember that these represent certain burials and might not reflect the average height of the entire Dina population. Okay, so what the AI has grabbed here is nothing that they can get in closed reports that are on university websites that you need access to in one way or another, on websites that host these university reports. And I read one of those from the University of Indiana, who says the Adena people and the Hopewell people were two different kinds of people living together in a type of relationship where the Adena were the ruling class and the Hopewell were, in fact, their subjects, similar to the Watusi tribe that we have evidence for in the 20th century. This dynamic going on, and possibly the Brenton Winter Caves there, Brenton Winter Caves there in Europe there. So Brighton Winter Caves in Austria, I believe it is. So same sort of thing going on there, except that all the giant ruling class, were exterminated with the ruling class, or at least a portion of them. And it's similar to what happened between the Adena and we know the Iroquois were the Hopewell who had to lead that area, and they left the Cherokee more or less in charge down there. People who spoke Iroquoian language. Okay, so there's more than this, though. I mean, this is giving a brief summary of the reports, and I've seen them and read them online on this channel, identified them, okay, on not my other channel, not this channel, but you can go over all the accounts on my other channel. I'm one of the only people who has all these accounts, courtesy of Chris Leslie, Greater Ancestors, who's kind enough to post all these accounts, where I've read many times. As a matter of fact, on this channel, I
Hey
posted the
guys,
one about
Bug Cats.
the coins found at these burial sites where people are dispatched from university. It wasn't amateur archaeologists like Herdliska says. Okay, he had an agenda against native peoples, against the church and the Bible and religion. Okay, and their belief that you know the fact that the Bible mentions giants just makes it true, and which is nonsense. It's bad logic anyway. It doesn't do that at all. See, this is what makes my channel different than anything. I don't think they were cannibals and everything else like that. So, I'm there, and then you have the people who don't believe in it at all. So I'm somewhere sandwiched in the middle of these people. So in any case, I've gone over on my channel many times through these accounts where people from university were dispatched to these archaeological sites to identify these remains. Not amateur archaeologists like Herdlicher says, okay? And where in many cases, these skeletal remains that were intact were purchased by the Smithsonian. Yes, the papers sensationalized, well, that's news, right? If you find out that some skeletal remains were unearthed, and then you find out that the Smithsonian made offer on them, you know, these things are said in the papers and everything or whatever. I mean, supposed to be held accountable, the fifth, estate and whatever it is, So what Are we going to believe Alice Herdlischka, or are we going to believe our own eyes? Okay, which says in the Bureau of Ethnology reports. In some cases, when searching this out, they'll say, well, the average